If you're just joining us, welcome. This is your host, Keely Austin, and it's Thriving Thursday. Our trainer today is Christion Sadler. Before Renatus, as a young teen, he was troublesome and kicked out of class a lot. Once he got older, he was experiencing financial scarcity. He was at a daily wage job in steel fabrication. He did hear about real estate and the wealth opportunity that real estate offers. He attended different guru events, and he felt like he wasn't getting anywhere. He found Renatus. He started hanging around people he wanted to be like. He showed up early to meetings, and he left late. He was helping out however and wherever he could. He was very determined. After Renatus, he's done multiple transactions, having net over 6 figures. He's a marketing leader, a PIT team member, one of the founding members of Team Elevate. He's been in real estate business now for over 13 years. He's always looking to add value to those around him, and we're very fortunate to have Christion as our trainer today. Christion, how are you doing?
I'm great, Keely. How are you?
I'm wonderful, thank you. Let me get you the controls.
Okay, perfect. Well, as you're doing that, I just want to say thank you so much, Keely, for everything that you're doing and taking over this task of these daily morning calls. I know that's not anything light, and you don't take it, lightly. I can tell that by the seriousness in which you run these calls, and I'm really grateful for it. The way you start us off and get the videos going, and also all of your introductions. So I've been paying attention as I've been able to jump on here, and I'm excited to work side by side with you on these morning calls on each and every Thursday. And I've heard great things about Eloy as well. So I want to give a big shout out to Eloy for taking on these calls for me for a little while, which gave me the opportunity to go on a couple of different vacations that were both about a week long. And, that's what this life is all about, right? And that's the reason that we're running this business, is to give ourselves the opportunity to take the time to be with our family and enjoy life. And I'm really grateful for Eloy in taking that on. In fact, I'm going to give Eloy another shout out, because while I was on my last vacation, while we were, out enjoying time in Las Vegas at a resort out there, he entered a combo order for me for one of my guests that I had that came to Thursday night and a follow-up, and he actually entered that combo order. So when I got home, I happened to have, a phone call, and basically this gentleman said, "Hey, with your permission, I'd like to put in my money for my order." And that was quite a nice surprise. I always enjoy making money while I'm on vacation. And so thank you, Eloy. Thank you, Keely. Thank you, everybody on this team that continues to keep things running for us, keep things moving. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just see if I can stop a bunch of these videos that are off to the side here. So we'll get rid of those distractions. And see what chat we have going on. Okay, cool. Yes, that is what Renatus is all about. Okay, so I've got a couple of stories for you guys. And with these stories are a couple of different principles that I want you to think about. And actually, one of them relates to this gentleman that just enrolled in his combo. And so this first story, it's actually written by a teacher, and I'm going to go ahead and share it from her perspective, and then I want to anchor in the principle of it. I had a feeling of relief when I began to understand that a youngster needs more than just a subject matter. I know mathematics well, and I teach it well. I used to think that was all I needed to do. Now I teach children, not math. I accept the fact that I can only succeed partially with some of them. When I don't have to know all the answers. I seem to have more answers than when I try to be the expert. The youngster who really made me understand this was Eddie. I asked him one day why he thought he was doing so much better than last year. He gave meaning to my whole new orientation. It's because I like myself now when I'm with you, he said. He was in 3rd grade class. I taught at St. Mary's School in Morris, Minnesota. All 34 of my students were dear to me, but Mark Uckland was one in a million. Very neat in appearance, he had that happy to be alive attitude that made even the occasional mischievous delightful. Mark also talked incessantly. I tried to remind him again and again without talking talking without permission was not acceptable. What impressed me so much, though, was the sincere response every time I had to correct him for misbehaving. Thank you for correcting me, sister. I didn't know what to make of that first. Before long, I became accustomed to hearing it many times a day. Excuse me. One morning, my patience was growing thin when Mark talked once too often. I made a novice teacher's mistake. I looked at Mark and I said, if you say one more word, I'm going to tape your mouth shut. It wasn't 10 seconds later when Chuck blurted out, Mark is talking again. I hadn't asked any of the students to help me watch Mark, but since I had stated the punishment in front of the class, I had to act on it. I remember the scene as if it had occurred this morning. I walked to my desk very deliberately. Hold on. Opened the drawer and took out a roll of masking tape. Without saying a word, I proceeded to Mark's desk, tore off 2 pieces of tape, and made a big X with them over his mouth. I then returned to the front of the room. As I glanced at Mark to see how he was doing, he winked at me. That did it. I started laughing. The entire class cheered as I walked back to Mark's desk, removed the tape, and shrugged my shoulders. His first words were, "Thank you for correcting me, sister." At the end of the year, I was asked to teach junior high math. The years flew by, and before I knew it, Mark was in my classroom again. He was more handsome than ever and just as polite, so he had to listen carefully to my instruction with the new math. He did not talk much in 9th grade. On Friday, things just didn't feel right. We had worked hard on a new concept all week, and I sensed that students were growing frustrated with themselves and edgy with each other. I had to stop this crankiness before it got out of hand. So I asked them to list the names of the other students in the room on 2 sheets of paper, leaving space between each name. Then I told them to think of the nicest things they could say about each of their classmates and write it down. It took the remainder of the class period to finish the assignment, but as the students left the room, each one handed me their paper. Chuck smiled. Mark said, "Thank you for teaching me, sister. Have a good weekend." That Saturday, I wrote down the name of each student on a separate sheet of paper, and I listed what everyone else had said about the individual. On Monday, I gave each student his or her list. Some of them ran 2 pages. Before long, the entire class was smiling. "Really?" I heard whispered. I never knew that meant anything to anyone. I didn't know others liked me so much. No one ever mentioned those papers in class again. I never knew if they discussed them after class or if or with their parents, but it didn't matter. The exercise had accomplished its purpose. The students were happy with themselves and one another again. The group of students moved on. Several years later, after I returned from vacation, my parents met me at the airport. As we were driving home, Mother asked the usual questions about the trip, how the weather was, my experiences in general. There was a slight lull in conversation. Mother gave Dad a sideways glance and simply said, "Dad?" My father cleared his throat. "The Eklunds called last night," he began. "Really?" I said. "I haven't heard from them in years. I wonder how Mark is." Dad responded quietly. "Mark was killed in Vietnam," he said. "The funeral is tomorrow, and his parents would like it if you could attend." To this day, I can still point out the exact spot on I-494 where Dad told me about Mark. I had never seen a serviceman in a military coffin before. Mark looked so handsome, so mature. All I could think at that moment was, Mark, I would give all the masking tape in the world if you could just talk to me. The church was packed with Mark's friends, Chuck's sister sang the battle hymn of Republic. Why did it have to rain on the day of the funeral? It was difficult enough at graveside. The pastor said the usual prayers, and the bugler played one of those songs loved by Mark. As all who passed, the last person walked by the coffin happened to be me, and I sprinkled holy water on the coffin. As I stood there, one of the soldiers who acted as a pallbearer came up to me. "Were you Mark's math teacher?" he asked. I nodded as I continued to stare at the coffin. "Mark talked about you a lot," he said. After the funeral, most of Mark's former classmates headed to Chuck's farmhouse for lunch. Mark's mother and father were there, obviously waiting for me. "We want to show you something." His father, taking a wallet out of his pocket, "They found this on Mark when he was killed. We thought you might recognize it." Opening the billfold, he carefully removed 2 worn pieces of notebook paper that had obviously been taped, folded, and refolded many times. I knew without looking that the papers were the ones on which I had listed all the good things of Mark's classmates. And I said to him, "Thank you so much for doing that," Mark's mother said. As you can see, Mark treasured it. Mark's classmates started to gather around us. Chuck smiled rather sheepishly and said, "I still have my list. It's in the top drawer of my desk at home." John's wife said, "John asked me to put this in our wedding album." "I have mine too," Marilyn said. "It's in my diary." Then Vicky, another classmate, reached into her pocketbook, took out her wallet, and showed her worn, frazzled list to the group. "I carry this with me at all times." Vicky said without batting an eyelash, "I think we all saved our lists." That's when I finally sat down and cried. I cried for Mark and for all his friends who never see him again. So, folks, sometimes we don't understand the impact that we make. And as you guys continue to rise in your leadership and you do these trainings, you're going to get these moments where people come up to you and they talk about the difference that you made. But what I want you to understand is in every interaction with your prospects, it matters more about how you make them feel, specifically how you make them feel about themselves, more than it does how much you can teach them about the product, how much you can share with them about Renatus, how much real estate knowledge you have, whether you've done a deal or not. All of those things are excuses. And as you learn to help people believe in themselves more, that's when you're going to see more people enroll and you're going to see more of those people succeed. I remember when I first got started in the business, and I think back to it, and quite frankly, when I got started, it wasn't because the people I was talking to knew so much and I was so awed by their brilliance. It was because they made me feel like I could be something better. They believed in me more than I had believed in myself, more than anybody else had really believed in me. Don't get me wrong, like I had an amazing mother who believed I could do anything, but she didn't believe in the path that I had chosen, right? She didn't believe that real estate was my path. She believed, like most other people, that I should go get a job and work my way up the corporate ladder and maybe go to college someday. And it was the fact that Brandon and Cameron, who introduced me to the business, showed me that they believed in me. And I remember one incident in particular where this is when I had actually started in the business and I had just bought kind of the entry-level education, or what would equivalent as the essentials now. But I had been working on finding my funding to buy my combo. And I came to a training, and it was the day I had been going into banks. I would go to the training during the day, and then I was going into banks, and I was taking in my credit report, and I was saying, "Hey, would you give me a loan? Would you give me a loan?" And I was trying to find the last $3,500 that I needed to be able to fund the remainder of my education. And the next day, I still didn't have the money. I just didn't have it all yet, anyways. And I went in. I was walking in. I had actually got there late because I went to one of the banks in the morning, and I had got to the training late. It was a regional training. So as I'm talking about this, I want you to think about what regional are you going to? Because sometimes those small moments happen when you don't realize it at those types of events, and this is what it was for me. So I'm walking in to the regionals, and I ran into Brandon, and Brandon was the equivalent of a pit team member, I guess you'd call it at this point. I guess it was closer to pack. And as I was walking in, he had a name tag that it was a leadership name tag. And I was walking in, he greeted me and asked how I was doing, and I was looking at his tag trying to read what it said, and he pointed to it and he said, "You're next." It was two words. It wasn't something that he, had written out. It wasn't anything that he had, planned to say or anything else. He just noticed that I was looking at his leadership tag, and he tapped on it twice, and he said, "You're next." And he looked at me, and I could tell that he was sincere. And so that little moment right there, I mean, that kind of put me over the edge. That set me a vision for myself where I believed that I could be more than I was, that I could be a leader, that I could, take other people to a new level in their life. And folks, if you understand how important that was to my success, you'll understand those small things that you're saying to people on a daily basis matter. And so I want you to think about it. I mean, I remember back before I was ever, an entrepreneur or in Renatus, the things that I said to my friends weren't very nice. Even though that we were joking most of the time, I didn't, I didn't sit down with them and say, "Oh, I believe in you and you can do this." And I mean, I guess at certain moments we did, but for the most part, we were always joking with each other, giving each other a hard time. And, and a lot of it was not very nice things. And as Bob Snyder said on the video this morning, thoughts are things, right? And so whether you're sarcastic or not, I want you to be conscious about the things that you're saying, because those little things that you say matter. And in fact, if you realize how you're talking with your prospects, and when you can say those small things that help them believe in themselves more, you're going to get more enrollments. And the last thing I'll kind of anchor on this principle is you can never predict who's going to be that perfect prospect. And it's so interesting to me that, sometimes, excuse me, you look at a whole list of prospects that you've got and, the interactions that you've had with them. And oftentimes it's those people who talk the most, right? Those people that make themselves out to seem like the best prospect that end up doing a lot of talking and not doing a whole lot of action. And I'll give you kind of the dichotomy, if I will. So I went and spoke recently at a personal development event. And so out of that event, I had 17 people that signed up that they wanted to come to a private house tour with me. And so I hosted the private house tour. I had 16 people that actually showed up. And those were all my personal guests. And out of there were some of those that man, they just talked so much about how much they wanted to work with me and how this is what they've been looking for. And I mean, one in particular, he's a chiropractor, and he talked about all these things that he's doing, all these goals that he's had, and it made it seem like he was kind of this perfect prospect, right? And I put a lot of attention on him in the beginning. And he came to the event, he came to the next event. We actually met in person. Even Michael Huggins said, "Holy cow, this guy is like jumping out of his seat, ready to join." And then when we sat down and I gave him some action steps of what to do next, I got to be honest with you guys, he hasn't necessarily followed through on those action steps in the way we said. And the first step was simply to email me his plan of action and what he's going to be doing to get his funding together to fund his education. And I've talked to him a couple of times, and when I talk to him, he says, "Hey, I've got great things going," and I believe in this guy. I do believe, and I hope for his sake that he comes through and he makes it happen. But Stephen, this other gentleman that just bought his combo, he was kind of the most unassuming. First at the event, the personal development event, I just noticed that his interaction was a lot less. And when I talked to him, he would ask me questions, but then, he would just kind of end the conversation. He didn't necessarily tell me, much about how he's going to do this and how he's always been looking for that or any of those things. And so when he came to the house tour, we spoke afterwards, and he wasn't going to make it to the next Thursday night. So he didn't come. And I told everybody, "Hey, if you want to come to a future event, just send me a text and I'll make sure I get you booked for another event." I didn't get a text from him. I didn't get any of those things. I ended up shooting him a text and just saying, and just connecting with him. And I thanked him for sticking around afterwards, because, even though Stephen was really, kind of quiet and, unassuming, he actually stuck around afterwards and asked if there's anything that I could do or anything that he could do to help. And so I actually gave him the leftover pizza, and he helped me, kind of clean up the trash. And we stuck around for a little while afterwards. And so I just thanked him for that. I didn't even ask him anything else. I just kind of thanked him. And, he talked about how the kids at his house really enjoyed the pizza. And then I sent him another text that just said, "Are you interested in coming to a future event?" And he said, "Actually, yeah, I believe that I am. And so I invited him out to last Thursday. That's when I was out of town. And so that was the following Thursday from, the week of the event. And, um, I confirmed with him that he was going to be there, but there wasn't a whole lot of talking, besides that. And then he had texted me while I was on vacation and just said, hey, when would be a good time that we could get on the phone? And so we set a time when I got back into town, and that was Monday. And so Stephen, turns out, came on Thursday. I don't know what his interaction was. I don't know who he talked to, but I did trust the team. I knew that the team was taking care of all my prospects that I had there that day. And he came on Friday as well. And, apparently what he heard, what he saw was good enough that he got with Eloy and he put in his order. And so his order was already placed. Now I didn't realize this. I hadn't even checked into my back office before Monday when we had our scheduled time to get on the phone. And so we got on the phone and, again, it was one of the most simple follow-ups I ever did, because all he did was say, hey, with your permission, I'd like to fund my order. Or actually, he said, with your permission, I'd like to buy my education. And I said, okay, great. What I can do is I can send you a link and I'm going to walk you through the order process and we'll get that order entered. How does that sound? And he said, oh, Eloy already entered the order for me. I just need to pay for it and I have the money now. And so I said, great. And, I said, how do you want to fund it? He said, do you take a debit card? And I said, yes, I do. And so we went ahead and put in the order. There was a little hiccup with it. Not that this really relates to the story, where he had to call his bank and raise the daily limit that he could spend on the card, because he'd never spent that much money at one time. But I mean, this is the guy that you wouldn't have expected. He works construction, really unassuming, not necessarily super talkative. And I'm not just talking about he put in his cash combo, meaning he got credit cards. He put in his cash combo, meaning he had the cash. And I don't know where it came from. Obviously it's probably something he's been saving up for a long time, or maybe he's got some people in his life that are, really committed to his success. I'm sure we'll have that conversation. He's coming back tonight, and we're actually going to be sitting down tomorrow and going over more of a game plan for him. So, anyways, I believe that related more to the way he felt when I just, thanked him for showing up early and staying late, and let him know that he was important, much more than, the information that I shared or any of those other things. So that was the first story and the principle that I wanted to anchor with you guys. We have a couple of chats here. Let me just check in on that real quick. Okay, perfect. So next story. And this one, I'm going to give you guys an exercise to leave the call with, okay? They call it the 333 story. And this was written by Bob Proctor. So this is coming from the words of Bob Proctor. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's amazing. All right. I was doing a weekend seminar at Deerhurst Lodge, north of Toronto. On Friday night, On Friday night, a tornado swept through the town north of us called Barrie, killing dozens of people and doing millions of dollars worth of damage. Sunday night, as I was coming home, I stopped the car when I got to Barrie. I got out the side of the highway and looked around. It was a mess. Everywhere I looked, there were smashed houses and cars turned upside down. That same night, Bob Templeton was driving down the same highway. He stopped to look at the disaster, just as I had. Only his thoughts were different than my own. Bob was the vice president of Telemedia Communications, which owns a string of radio stations in Ontario and Quebec. He thought there must be something you could do for these people with the radio stations they had. The following night, I was doing another seminar in Toronto. Bob Templeton and Bob Johnson, another vice president from Telemedia, came and stood in the back of the room. They shared their conviction that there had to be something they could do for the people of Barrie. After the seminar, we went back to Bob's office. He was now committed to the idea of helping the people who had been caught in the tornado. The following Friday, he called all executives at Telemedia into his office. At the top of a flip chart, he wrote 3 threes. He said to his executives, how would you like to raise $3 million 3 days from now, and in just 3 hours, give the money to the people in Barrie? There was nothing but silence in the room. Finally, someone said, Templeton, you're crazy. There's no way we can do that. Bob said, wait a minute. I didn't ask if we could or even if we should. I just asked you if you would like to. They all said, sure, we'd like to. He then drew a large T underneath the 333 on the side he wrote, why we can't. On the other side he wrote, how we can. I'm going to put a big X on the why we can't side. We're not going to spend any time on the ideas of why we can't. That's of no value. On the other side, we're going to write down every idea that we can come up with on how we can. We're not going to leave the room until we figure it out. There was silence again. Finally, someone said, we could do a radio show across Canada. Bob said, that's a great idea, and wrote it down. Before he had written, someone said, you can't do a radio show across Canada. We don't have radio stations across Canada. That was a pretty valid objection. They only had stations in Ontario and Quebec. Templeton said, that's why we can. That stays. But this was a really strong objection because radio stations are very competitive. They usually don't work together to get them to do so. It would be virtually impossible according to the standard way of thinking. All of a sudden, someone suggested, you could get Harvey Kirk and Lloyd Robertson, the biggest names in Canadian broadcasting, to anchor the show. That would be like Tom Brokaw and Sam Donaldson to anchor the show back in the day. They're anchors on national TV. They're not going to go on radio. At that point, it was absolutely amazing how fast and furious the creative ideas began to flow. That was on a Friday. The following Tuesday, they had a radiothon. They had 50 radio stations across the country that all agreed to broadcast it. It didn't matter who got the credit as long as the people in Barrie got the money. Harvey Kirk and Lloyd Robertson anchored the show, and they succeeded in raising $3 million in 3 hours within 3 business days. You see, you can do anything if you put your focus on how you can do it rather than why you can't. So I feel like that's an important principle for you guys to leave the call with. So here's what we're going to do. I want you to think about something that you want to accomplish. And, for example, we just had, I've been networking with Nate Lambert. I mean, I shouldn't say networking. I mean, he's a friend of mine. We get to talk all the time. And, he talked about how he wrote out a goal. And his goal was to make $143,000. Well, no, let me stop that. His goal was to enroll 30 cash combos in 60 days. So that was the big goal. And he's midway through that goal right now. And just to kind of give you an example of what that big goal has done for him, this last month, August, he made $143,000 paid to him cash from Renatus, $143,000 last month. And that came from his goal. Now, his goal was 30 combos in 60 days. So here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to write down a big goal for yourselves. Now, when you write down that big goal, I want you to think about something. And if this is a big goal that you're kind of making, let's call it realistic. Let's say this is a goal that's a little bit of a stretch. It's a stretch beyond, what you've done before, but it's something that you've already kind of got some things in the works. I want you to stretch a little bit further than that. And when you get your big goal, I want you to write a T below it. And over here, we're going to talk about why I can't. And over here, you're going to put how I can. So in other words, this big goal has to be something that will stretch you. Because if it's going to stretch you, there's going to be a whole list in your mind that's going to focus right here on why you can't before you even start. But as you write this out on a piece of paper, I want you to just put a big old X right there. We're not going to focus on why you can't. That doesn't benefit anybody. It's not going to do you any good. And I want you to start listing out how you can, all the different ways. It doesn't matter if they're realistic or not. Start writing them down. And as one really sparks a fire within you, start putting lists within that of how you can implement that action step. Set your big goal today, folks. Make your list. Remember, get rid of this over here. Focus over here. Don't talk to you about why you can't. Ask yourself how you can. That's it for today, folks. Appreciate all of you, and go out there and make it an amazing Thursday. Do this exercise today. I want to hear about it. Thanks, folks.